Welcome to Resourced and Resourceful Leadership, a podcast for people who care about the world and their impact in it. I'm your host, Dr. Christine Pettit. Thanks so much for listening in today. I'm really glad that you're here. At the end of the episode, I'm going to invite you to leave a message for me through SpeakPipe. Please do. I'd love to hear from you. I actually got my first message the other day, and it really made my day. One of my besties, Janine, had this to say.
What is this awesome speak pipe I've never heard of? You're so hip. I'm loving your podcast. I love that they're not an hour and that they're so you. Thank you for doing this. They help me feel grounded and connected and, dare I say, resourced. Thank you.
You are most welcome, Janine, and thank you so much for that. I appreciate your encouragement. And yes, most episodes, at least my solo ones, will not be an hour long, though I don't know, maybe one day I'll have something to say for a long time about a topic. But for now, I think short is good. I am looking forward to having some interviews come up in the near future. So those might be a little bit longer. But as always, I hope that you get some value out of those conversations and this episode today. In this episode, I'm going to share more about curiosity and how it can be an ally in difficult conversations. The last episode was Difficult Conversations Made Easier. And in that episode, I really dug into some of my favorite resources to use as I'm preparing to have a difficult conversation, as well as a guide that I created with questions that can help you map out how you want to approach a difficult conversation. I'm going to link to that again in the show notes, so definitely download your free guide. It's one that I have been sharing with clients. It seems like every other day. So I was like, I think it's important to just put this together and get it out there into the world. So curiosity and how it can be an ally in difficult conversations. Curiosity is one of those 8 C's of self-leadership that I've shared about in previous episodes. It's a strong desire to non-judgmentally explore and learn something new about a topic, a situation, or a person. So how often are we bringing curiosity into difficult conversations? I don't know about you, but if I'm not careful and I'm in a conversation that is difficult for me, and that means the stakes feel high, there's differing viewpoints, potentially strong emotions. Sometimes when that is the case, it's really hard to be curious. And we might take a position, I know sometimes I do, of wanting to be heard, wanting to win. And when you take that as the primary focus, it definitely can shut curiosity down. Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't make your point or want to get your needs met, but also I am saying curiosity can actually help you navigate those situations and be more likely to have an effective conversation. And also, curiosity can extend care to the person that you're talking to or people that you're talking to, and also allow you to learn something new, make sure that they're being heard in the process. And like I said, be more effective in our conversations. When we're curious, also, it helps to dial back some of the heatedness in a conversation that might cause it to be more explosive or to devolve in a way that's not really productive. So I was thinking about curiosity and just like where it's kind of shown up as I've been in my own journey learning about this and practicing curiosity. And I think every episode I give a disclaimer that I am not perfect in this. It is a practice, and I encourage you to practice as well and not expect perfection. But the more that we can practice, we'll just strengthen those muscles. So I think the first time I thought about this in a concrete way was when I was a teenager and I read The 7 Habits of Highly Effective Teens by Sean Covey. And that was a spin-off or adaptation of Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Very popular leadership book. I haven't revisited it since the 90s, so I can't vouch for the whole book or, have an in-depth analysis on it. But I remember the phrase and the concept of seek first to understand and then be understood. And I was looking that up tonight, just kind of looking through. The book's actually online if you want to look at the PDF, the teens one. But the subtitle to seek first to understand, then be understood is you have 2 ears and 1 mouth. Hello. So this idea of listening in a conversation and also seeking to understand the other person's viewpoint. I was also looking at the Crucial Conversations cheat sheet that is included in the free download that I have for you. And there are several skills in Crucial Conversations that really check the box around curiosity. One place that I notice curiosity in the Crucial Conversations framework is in becoming aware of if you're getting emotional or telling clever stories when it comes to a difficult conversation. So if you are telling yourself you're purely a victim in this story, a question that you can ask yourself is, what am I pretending not to notice about my role in this story? If you are telling a villain story about the other person and making them 100% a villain, then you might ask yourself, why would a reasonable, rational, decent person do this? And there certainly are instances where there are pure victims and pure villains, but a lot of times in the conversations that we're having and the dynamics that we're navigating, it's more complex than that kind of either or. So it's good to ask ourselves these questions. If we're telling ourselves a helpless story, perhaps tapping into curiosity, maybe even creativity or courage or confidence, something that would open up those other qualities, is what could I do right now to move toward what I really want? What choices do I have? But thinking about that when it comes to a conversation and how you want to approach it, curiosity can help ask some of these questions. What am I pretending not to notice? Trying to put yourself in the other person's shoes. Why would a reasonable, rational, or decent person do this? And also bringing curiosity to what you're hoping for from the conversation and how to move in that direction. I notice it in some other places as well. This isn't quite the seek first to understand, then be understood, but it's a curiosity. One of the skills in Crucial Conversations is to state your path, and STATE is an acronym for The S is share your facts. Then the T is tell your story. The A is ask for others' paths. Then the next T is talk tentatively. And encourage testing is the E. So when you share your facts, it's, I noticed this, or twice you did this, and it's kind of like, I noticed that you were looking at your phone during the meeting. I don't know. Twice you told me that you didn't want to hear me talk anymore, whatever the conversation is. But stating it in a factual way about what I noticed, what your facts are, and then what you're making sense of it. I'm beginning to wonder if, or it seems to me, this. Finishing that logical sentence and then asking for the others past, how do you see it? Help me understand. So that's that curiosity. If you are going to share your perspective, also being curious about the others and what facts and perspective they're bringing to the conversation. To talk tentatively, to own that it is your story, and also how are you interpreting those actions or what it is that you're talking about. And encourage testing. Do you see it differently? So these things are bringing in curiosity because there is an opening for the other person to share their perspective and for you to learn from that. Of course, we do have to be careful, right? Sometimes we could ask these things just to try to attack it right away or to argue with their facts. So I encourage you to try to maintain that openness and curiosity as much as possible in a difficult conversation. I think also some of the skills around if someone is moving towards silence or verbal violence, exploring their path, asking, I'd like to know what you think about this, or paraphrasing, so are you saying this? Do you think that? Asking those questions to help to understand where the other person is coming from. And getting those understandings out on the table help us to come to more generative solutions and have more generative conversations. I also remember, I don't remember where I heard this from exactly, but something that's coming up for me right now as I'm talking is also when you can, instead of looking at one another as the problem, look at the issue that you're trying to resolve as the problem. So you're looking at it together instead of just kind of firing back and forth between two people, but trying to say, like, for example, I'm thinking about something to do with maybe home life. Maybe it's, okay, the house isn't to the standard of clean that you want. So one way to have this conversation is, let's say it's two partners talking. This is a totally made up scenario, by the way. Two partners talking. Oh my gosh, the house needs to be cleaner. Well, you did this, you did that, I'm not doing this, or I do all of these things and you're not doing that, and just kind of going back and forth, like looking at each other and blaming one another for the house being how it is, versus can we look at the issue overall and see if there's some common ground in terms of what the problem is. So yes, we want to create a healthy, like peaceful environment to live in, and we agree on that. Okay, what are we currently doing to cultivate that, and what needs to be done? Can we look at that shared goal that we have versus the kind of tit for tat blame game? So that's just one example. but kind of taking that problem outside of just the person. And I'm not saying, like, there's are certainly times when the difficult conversation is look, you're disappointing me in this way, or like you broke my trust or whatnot. But when possible, how can you look for a mutual purpose, looking at the problem together instead of having that kind of back and forth between one another? The last thing that I am going to share about this right now is I'm taking a course on mediation and conflict management. It's through Harvard Law School's program on negotiation. And I signed up for this program because I had used some of the tools from the program on negotiation as I was preparing to facilitate a difficult conversation. And I found some good tips and resources on the website. So anyway, I kind of had it in my mind. And then throughout the course of the last year in my coaching and consulting work, I have found conflict. I mean, and just again, the world that we live in, right? Conflict everywhere. So I was like, I want to increase my skills around conflict and mediation too. I was curious because I'm not a trained mediator, but I certainly do some mediation in my coaching work, and I support people in having difficult conversations. So I wanted to get some more skills in my toolbox. And so I signed up for this course through Harvard Law School, and it's a quarter-long 10-week course. I just had class 4, and it was interesting, and really I feel like the activities were getting us to practice our curiosity muscle, and it was really hard for me. So I'm going to just share one of them. One of the activities is called Hot Topics. And before we went into breakout groups, we looked at a list of typical hot topics, and we had to pick one that we felt strongly about. So some of the examples are immigration, vegetarian, vegan, euthanasia, child discipline, climate change, Donald Trump, vaccinating, sports, if you feel very impassioned about sports, gun control. So gun control is actually what I chose as my hot topic. And it's one that I believe in strong gun control for the purposes of that activity. You had to state your position, and then another person in the group, regardless of their beliefs, had to take the opposite position. And so I said, I believe that gun control is important. So the other person who went had an assigned role of saying that they had the opposite position. And then my job was to ask them questions to understand their opinion using inquiry. Now, I think it was a little bit challenging because I believe my partner was Canadian and he totally had the same position as me, but he had to act as if he had the opposite position. And so my role then was so he just stated the opposite of mine. And then my role was to ask only inquiry-based questions and try to learn about their perspective and to be wary of leading questions. And then another participant had the role of coach, and they were supposed to let us know, to buzz us, or to, say, hey, I think you are moving toward advocacy. Now, I will say it was challenging in part because the conversation wasn't super meaty. The person had been given instructions to just kind of answer short questions or make short responses. And so some of the questions there, though, were like, how long have you had this belief? What makes you think this? The person argued around protecting their family. So trying to understand, so why does this make you feel like you can protect your family? They also said it was like a God-given right, or their right as an American, and talked about the Second Amendment. And so I just had to ask questions to try to understand their position. I did move away from, I didn't ask any advocacy questions, but it was really hard not to. And it was also hard not to point out when I like immediately jump to flaws in their logic and like want to argue. And even if my questions were inquiry based, in my head, I was asking questions, even though they sounded inquiry based. I was asking them so I could pull out information that normally I would then argue with or fight with. It was a 5-minute activity, and it was hard. And it wasn't just hard for me. When we came back from our group, so many people put in the chat that it was challenging. I think one person said it wasn't hard for them. But when you take a topic that you really care about, curiosity can shut way down when somebody else has an opposing viewpoint. And I think, one, that's like totally okay and human. And two, I think it's good to be aware of if we do want to bridge differences, or even if we want to understand how to be more effective at advocating. So that was one of the activities. The other one was called facilitating awareness. And this one I was an observer for. But in this case, we all had to think of a conversation that we have that makes us mad every time it comes up. And so in this case, it was more interpersonal, what people brought up. Certainly the hot topics one could be interpersonal too, but the example that the person in the group I was with gave was relating to talking with her partner about expectations they have around their children. And it's a blended family so it included her stepchildren and biological children, and some comparisons about the way that the kids are being responsible and things like that. And some real impatience about responsibility. And the goal of this was actually to see how the person talking about it was more activated or triggered, and to see what questions could help them move to a less triggered, more open space. So we talked about moving from the red zone to the green zone. And the person who was the inquiring person had to ask about and acknowledge their thoughts, ask about and acknowledge their feelings without problem solving and without agreeing or disagreeing. So some of the questions that the inquiry-based questions there are, when this happens, what are you thinking or feeling? How do you interpret it? Making guesses, are you thinking or feeling this? Why do you think or feel that? Even ranking those different ideas and feelings. So in the role play, I remember for this activity, the person who was the inquirer, I guess, for lack of a better word, asked, okay, so I'm hearing some frustration. What else is there? And then they made a guess about worry. It sounds like there might be some worry in there. Is that right? And then asking what feels most present for you. If you had to rank them in order, are you feeling more worried, more frustrated, whatever the other emotions are, more exhausted? How would you rank those? And then doing that helped them parse it out and shift. When you ask questions like that, it helps the brain shift out of the red zone and into the green zone, out into that more kind of thinking part of the brain versus the quick reactive part of the brain. Asking questions, why do you think you react so strongly to that? Again, paraphrasing, so you think this or feel this, it sounds like you might think this. What else? And then to see if they're ready to problem solve, would it help to identify possible options? So I thought this was an interesting activity because you could see, based on the questions that were asked, the person move out of the red zone and into a more regulated green zone, and then sometimes back into the red and green. So thinking about what curiosity can do to help people feel heard, and some of the other things that we talked about in that activity were typical triggers for people. So one of them is appreciation or recognition. People have a need. It can look different, but people typically have a need around appreciation or recognition. So it's a trigger when they don't feel like they're receiving that. Autonomy or control, when we feel like we don't have control over a situation, or we're not able to move forward, make decisions for ourselves, or make decisions that are good. So another one in kind of the second round of this, with someone in my group, she was talking about how her boss was making everyone come back to the office. Definitely also a hot topic. And how she was feeling like the results would not be good, and the boss really just didn't care. And there's definitely a lack of autonomy and control there, as well as maybe appreciation about her experience as a worker, or recognition of her experience as a worker. Another typical trigger for people is affiliation. Am I in or am I out? So if you're kind of out of the group or feeling left out, that can be a trigger. Fairness is a strong trigger for people. Why me? And then finally, status. Feeling like they're losing status, or that comparison around status can be a trigger for people. I share these just because, this particular episode I didn't map out I didn't write out every word that I was going to say, which you can probably tell, but I wanted to share what I'm learning in real time in this mediation and conflict management course, because I think it's interesting. And as I was sharing in the last episode, bringing more curiosity into our world, being able to navigate challenging conversations, both interpersonally and more broadly, I think is important. It's an important part of bringing more peace and justice into the world, and more peace into our lives. And sometimes these hard conversations can bring disruption too. I want to acknowledge that these conversations are called difficult conversations for a reason. So there can be disruption when you bring up topics that are challenging, but I do think it's worth it. It's like the saying, maybe trite but true, the truth will set you free. I think there's something to that. I also think it's important in this time to practice curiosity and not only so much what you believe. I think I'm having a hard time saying this because I'm recognizing the broader scope of injustice in the world right now. And so I'm not trying to reduce or minimize injustice in any means. But what I am trying to share are more skills to help us navigate these challenges and injustices and just the difficulties in our interpersonal lives so that we can bring about more peace and healing and be empowered in our own lives to move forward in a grounded way. That's my hope. I am so curious what you got out of this episode, and I would love to hear from you. I really appreciate you listening to the Resourced and Resourceful Leadership podcast. Remember to download your free difficult conversation resource and prep guide at Dr. Christine Pettit, drchristinepettit.com/difficult. Again, I will link that in the show notes. And if you want to hear more of the Resourced and Resourceful Leadership podcast, please follow or subscribe to the show wherever you like to listen or watch your podcasts. To support the show, please leave a 5-star review and share the show with a few people who you think would appreciate it. And finally, please check out the link to SpeakPipe in the show notes. I'd love it if you left me a message. Be like Janine. Leave me a message about what stood out to you from this show or topics you'd like me to cover in future episodes. Thanks again. Take good care.